Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Built in Texas series. With me on the line is the founder and CEO of Jaunt, an air group company. His name is Martin Peryea. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate you inviting me today for a little discussion on what we're doing.
Yeah, what you guys are doing is super exciting. So really grateful to have you here and excited to get your story on record on the show. So Martin, why don't you kick us off with a bit about your background and color in the picture for us of the origin story of Jaunt?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I'm basically an aerospace engineer, 40 years in the industry, mostly in the vertical takeoff and landing aspects of helicopter design, development, and certification activities with production experience. I had a chance to work in the traditional commercial airplane business for a period of time, running a very large engineering and manufacturing engineering organization. I'm a technologist at heart. I have a degree in applied physics and a master's in aerospace engineering. And so I am a subject matter expert when it comes to, flying air vehicles, both helicopters and airplanes. And we co-founded the company in 2019 to pursue this new emerging market that's developing right now. We call it urban air mobility. It's the ability to transport, people and cargo in and around cities using a vertical takeoff and landing machine that's fully electric. It flies on battery systems and therefore is very, very quiet. And we're designing a very safe aircraft to get in and around those cities without people really seeing or hearing the aircraft for the most part.
So it's like a ninja, get your
Yeah,
ninja craft.
absolutely. Absolutely. One of the issues a lot of the public have with helicopters is they're very loud. And so we've eliminated all of the sound associated with helicopter flight, that vertical takeoff and landing aspects, by using what we call a compound aircraft, an aircraft that has wings like an airplane, and it actually has a rotor like a helicopter that's used for a very, very short time period. It's mostly airplane type flight activity going from point A to point B.
So Martin, what is the problem exactly? Because it seems to me like we can go from A to B already. There's an obvious problem there, isn't there? But what you're
Yeah,
kind
there is. Today's helicopters were really designed to be really a utility aircraft that can perform multiple, missions, serve multiple markets, and it wasn't really specifically designed for that urban air mobility mission, flying in and around the cities and doing it very quietly. Helicopters are very expensive to operate. And so the industry for the last decade or so have been working on the electrification of aircraft. And they were waiting for, battery technology, motors and motor controller technologies to mature to make it feasible so that you could actually design an aircraft that could run off electricity, battery powered. And so the operational cost drops significantly. There's about a 40% reduction in the cost to operate the aircraft. And so it's affordable now for anybody to basically jump on one of these aircraft and use it as an air taxi service. And as you know, around our crowded cities, New York City, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, you really can't build any more infrastructure per se in terms of automobiles. And so the only mechanism that you really have today is to do it via air corridors, and using these types of vehicles to move people across the city and in cargo. There's a good fair amount of automobiles and trucks that are associated with moving cargo across the city, and they create a tremendous greenhouse gas footprint. Idling in traffic, for example, and we can do it much more efficiently, cheaper, and safely.
Martin, I don't know whether you've seen that movie, The Fifth Element, with Bruce Willis. Back in the day, and you had, it was set in the future with like cars flying amongst buildings and things like that. Do you imagine that as a real world scenario? Like if we were chatting before we went live, but like in Denver here, you can see like there's lots of aircraft and things like that, but they're sitting at like 10, 20, 30,000 feet.
Right.
What you don't imagine as a scenario currently is Matt Brown, the CEO, gets into a Jaunt Air Mobility machine and goes from, where your son is north, from like, South Denver to north of Boulder in one of these machines, and like flying through buildings. How far off is that as a real world scenario from your perspective?
Yeah, referencing the Fifth Element movie where you had multiple, vehicles traveling, in that airspace. And of course, the feasibility of something of that nature isn't plausible just due to physics until someone can crack the nut on anti-gravity type machines. There's a certain amount of space required for aircraft to fly in because it needs to move air in order to maintain, lift and flying around. You won't, obviously have that kind of congestion taking place today. And depending on the air routes that are going to be set up in and around these cities, you'll have, quite a few aircraft that will be flying. But there's quite a bit of space, as you know, for aircraft to fly today. All of your general aviation aircraft that are flying, fly under what they call visual flight rules and maintain, separation distances between aircraft. The authorities, require that there be adequate spacing between aircraft while you're flying. And so those rules will, really, set the requirements in terms of spacing, so you don't get into the scenario where you have congestion in the air, if you will. And so it'll take a while for the industry to actually produce the number of aircraft where that will become a problem. And it is, feasible that a lot of these aircraft would be flying, fully autonomous under very, strict flight paths. And certainly the public acceptance, the policymakers of the cities and the states will kind of, regulate how that's going to look like in the future.
So, Martin, what would you say is the size of the opportunity that you guys are going after?
Yeah, there's been numerous studies conducted over the last several years by all of the very, very large consulting firms. In the market projection for this particular new emerging market is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Some reaching into the trillions in the out years. The number of aircraft that are projected for this market is in the thousands, tens of thousands of aircraft. And of course, today, we're not building that quantity of aircraft today. And so it is a new mindset for the aerospace industry to produce the number of aircraft that are going to be needed for this industry. So new manufacturing methods and new technologies are being worked to support the number of aircraft that are going to be needed. And then there's the infrastructure piece that's going to be required. These little vertiports that will be set up to handle the flight departures and arrivals. And of course, the charging stations that will be needed for the aircraft itself. And so there's a lot of market opportunity for all of the supporting systems and infrastructure needed for this new emerging market.
And Martin, who would you say is your customer for this? Like, who, if you think about the addressable market, is this for like a high net worth individual, like Matt Brown, or are you looking at like FedEx to add new, more cost effective distribution or transport solutions for them? Where does
Yeah,
the
that's,
rubber
that's
hit the road?
yeah, very, very good question. So there's really two markets. One is the air taxi where you're moving people in and around the city itself. And as I mentioned earlier, the operational costs of these aircraft are low enough where really anybody can afford to call one of these up. Um, Uber actually kickstarted this industry about 5 years ago or so, where they had conducted some studies and held some conferences and pulled in the aerospace experts to look at the feasibility of using electric aircraft for air taxi, where you would use your app, and if you needed to go across town to go to the airport, for example, the car would pick you up, take you to one of these vertiports. You jump on one of these electric aircraft, fly to the airport or another vertiport, and of course there'd be an Uber car waiting for you to take you to that last mile or so. And the costs on doing that is very similar to taking a Uber XL. And we like to use the example here, certainly in Dallas Fort Worth, where I live, going from downtown Dallas to downtown Fort Worth. Today takes about 50 minutes or so, depending on traffic. And you could do that entire flight in about 15 minutes for about the same costs as you would take for the Uber, maybe a little cheaper, but certainly a significant time savings to get across town. And again, there's a lot of city examples where, Uber are shuttling people between downtown and the airports. And so that is the market. And primarily, we are in the business of designing and developing and manufacturing aircraft. And we're working with operators, existing operators that would operate their aircraft and provide these services. There are new companies that are being created today specifically for this new market in various cities and, of course, various countries. The other market potential is the cargo. So you could, move people during the day and move cargo at night. We're designing our particular aircraft to take what we call a standard pallet load, a cargo load. You pop out the 4 passenger seats, and next thing you know, you have a flat floor that can take a pallet, and so you can move that load across the city to various industrial sites that are using a lot of material, for example. We have 2 Amazon centers here, for example, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, one north and one south. And they have to move, parcels back and forth. They use trucks to do that, and we can certainly do that with this particular type of aircraft and do it, cheaper, quicker, and obviously not generate the greenhouse gases associated with diesel trucks, for example. The market potential there is significant. There's a lot of areas where congestion with trucks is becoming a problem. More and more people are buying items online, which require shipping, and it certainly has created a huge market potential. And so we are currently talking to all of the major shippers right now. They're all looking into using this type of new aircraft to move large packages in and around cities.
Fantastic. So who's on your team currently? I mean, how hard is it to build this thing? Because it doesn't seem like an electric single person helicopter, or I don't even know if helicopter is the right word, but mobility aircraft, let's just say. Who's on your team, and how hard has it been to create this type of product?
Yeah, so it is an aircraft, and so it does require a large group of engineers, aerospace engineers, designers to go through the proper design. Sorry about that. the design and analysis of the aircraft itself. You have to build, prototypes and fly prototypes. You have to acquire a lot of, test data associated with the aircraft. It worked very closely with the authorities. The FAA, for example, here in the United States, they're responsible for the certification of these aircraft to make sure that these aircraft are indeed safe for the flying public. And so we do have an engineering team in place to do the design and development. We are working with some existing aerospace companies to help us in that process. It does require a lot of experience to design an aircraft, and these systems are, complicated in that sense. And so it does require, quite a bit of experience. And again, we have teamed up with some very capable aerospace companies to develop the critical systems, like the battery system, for example. We are using BAE Aerospace located in New York to design that system for us. And we are using another company here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area located in Red Oak, Carbon Aerospace. They're experts in aircraft manufacturing using new technologies with thermoplastic composites. And so we are employing that kind of capabilities and skill sets to go through this process. It's not a quick process. It takes about 5 years to really develop an aircraft from start to finish, assuming you don't run into any major technical issues that were not foreseen at the beginning.
Curious to ask this one, Martin, like what's the barrier to entry here? Like if I was a high net worth individual, I'm like, I really dig this thing. I'm keen to get my hands on one of these, and I'm not Uber, who has massive balance sheets, who can afford to buy, 1,000 of these things in one go. What is the barrier to access here? Like how much do one of these things is going to cost Matt Brown, the high net worth individual? Is that a scenario that you've planned for? I'm sure you have.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So if you currently look at, aircraft sales today, all the way from, general aviation to the big business jets, it's a spectrum, a large spectrum. And of course, your high net worth individuals and corporations, can afford these big corporate jets. General aviation is certainly much more affordable for individuals like you and me. And so this aircraft is really geared for commercial operations where you're putting it to work every day. And so the price tag is, roughly 1.5 million, depending on the features that you have in the aircraft. And so it takes a few aircraft to have a good size fleet to serve a particular market area. And so there is obviously money involved in terms of the purchase, but the leasing market, a lot of aircraft are actually leased out. So you would work through a leasing company to make it affordable, so you can acquire the aircraft and basically pay a monthly lease on the aircraft itself. That's very, very affordable for a lot of companies out there that want to, start in the operations business.
Yeah, I was in New York last week, and I met a couple of young guys, super young. I feel like I'm so old these days. But they've got a company called Uber Jets, and their whole thing is literally, it's Uber for jets. So you whip out your app, book your kind of like private jet, time, date, whatever. It's a membership based thing. And I think it was like $8,000 or $15,000 a year, depending on like what tier you sit in. But what I was interested in, what I observed was this idea of like the gig economy, where you can gig your experience or gig access or pay for what you use, idea or principle, and how that's translating into not only the commercial side of things, but also to the sectors where they were previously, inaccessible to pretty much everybody. Like you had to be in the top 0.1%, or like it wasn't a thing. There was another founder, Alex, who runs a company called Rotor, and so they're giving access to the super yacht industry, which again, if you had $100 million to drop in a yacht, that's fine, but for everybody else, not fine. And so again, giving them access to previously, inaccessible markets or experiences and things like that. I know you're talking about commercial. Do you feel like the opportunity here, or have you, like, on your roadmap, when is this going to be like a private thing as well as a commercial thing?
Well, certainly there's going to be quite a few individuals that will end up, buying these aircraft for private use. Um, and there is the leasing aspects where, a few individuals could purchase this aircraft and timeshare the aircraft. So these will be made available, to the market in that sense. Again, this aircraft is primarily designed, for flights in and around a small, region, because they are battery powered, and battery powered aircraft don't have the kind of range as you would typically find in a traditional airplane or a traditional helicopter. And so the use of this aircraft, could be very attractive to individuals that need to travel, in and around the city or get across this city. And so we do see that aspect of the market. It's going to be obviously a much smaller market than the larger commercial operators, which will buy, a large fleet of these aircraft and operate these aircraft. You will be able to pull up your app and basically, schedule a flight time, very similar to what's done today with certainly, Lyft and Uber, for example. They will, integrate that ability to, book an aircraft flight from, some convenient location close to you to, another location that you need to travel to, and it'll be seamless. And again, the costs will be, similar or even lower to what you would typically pay for an Uber or Lyft ride across town.
That would be amazing. I need to get to Vail, and I want to avoid the traffic. This is the solution.
It's really the time savings associated with taking one of these aircraft. In addition, when you do that, you actually, remove a car off the road. And there was a study done by Oak Ridge National Labs. They looked at the traffic between downtown LA and the airport LAX. And so one aircraft, has the equivalent of removing, 4 cars off the highway in terms of the amount of greenhouse gas that is produced. It's not as if it's, removing physically 4 cars. The one car that it does remove actually improves the traffic flow. So the cars, instead of being in stop and go traffic, actually drive, much faster, through that corridor. And so there is a kind of a critical mass associated with the number of cars on the highway and how that stop and go traffic forms. And these aircraft can remove that. So a pretty significant reduction towards meeting certainly the state of California's goals of a green economy.
Absolutely. Martin, just wanted to quickly talk to you about funding. So you've got, I was on Crunchbase, they don't actually list the total amount, but if you look at all the different investment raises that you've done, it's a significant amount. If you would, how much roughly have you guys raised to date to get this thing mobilized?
Yeah, so we by design, in terms of our business model, we're somewhat cautious in terms of the amount of money that we would raise. And as you know, as you raise money, it dilutes the shareholders. And so we took a little bit more conservative approach in terms of securing our critical suppliers that are helping us design and build the aircraft. And our partners are actually doing a lot of that development work in terms of the business arrangement that we have right now. So we don't need to raise as much capital associated with that because they're spending their research and development dollars towards the development of this aircraft. I can't tell you exactly the amount of money that we have raised, but we did publicly announce not long ago that we submitted our S1 document to the SEC. The S1 is a document that's required for a company to go public. We merged with a group of companies in April of this year. It's called the Aero Group, and so this group of companies is like I said, is going public through a traditional IPO. That's currently the plan today, but certainly we are looking at other financial opportunities. We are doing some development work up in Canada, and we are working with the Canadian federal government and the provincial governments up in Canada for funding for the program itself. And so traditionally to develop an aircraft of this nature, and depending on the technology that needs to be developed, it could, range anywhere from, $700 million to over $1 billion to get through the development process. And so some of our competitors are taking a more vertical integrated approach in terms of the technologies they're developing. And so they're spending a lot of money on developing these new technologies. And of course, they've raised those funds through a de-SPAC process where they became a public company, where they merged with an existing SPAC, and so that helped raise a very large war chest of funds for their individual development. We're taking a different approach. We're using other people's money.
Yes, OPM baby, that's the way to go.
Well, it spreads the risk quite a bit. It certainly motivates the entire group of people to push through on the development aspects of it. Everyone is vested, and everyone wants to see the project succeed. And so there's a lot of motivation behind that aspect of our particular business model.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like what I see founders or visionaries such as yourself doing in terms of raising money. Like there's obviously the private and public markets, and then what I'm seeing, because I do like 50 of these shows every month, is like you start to see patterns. And so one of the patterns is medtech, biopharma, healthcare, typically public markets, especially in hardware, and anything that's like hard science, EV, electric vehicle, again, also public markets. Anything like software, like the normal startup-y type stuff is like private. This is really interesting. Lots of guys I know listed companies on the NASDAQ to fund their businesses. A lot of guys doing reverse mergers, especially in healthcare. And it's really interesting to see how many different options there are. And I think there's this paradigm like, oh, well, it must be venture capital. It's like, no, dude, it's not just VC. Like there's lots of ways to raise money. It's just like there's this narrative, isn't there? That like for you, for argument's sake, well, it's got to be venture capital, isn't it? I mean, huge market, very hard to, barrier to entry for competitors. You're obviously leading the category in terms of the opportunity that, and so on and so forth. So you go, oh, no, it's venture capital. It's like, no, it's not. Like there's other ways to do that through strategic partnerships, as you mentioned, and an end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am an engineer by training, but I quickly became a finance person. We did a lot of learning as part of this whole process, and fortunately, we had a chance to talk to a lot of CEOs and CFOs of new companies. and they were willing to share, their experience and their journey that they had in terms of the companies they started, and and a lot of valuable experience that we gleaned from these individuals that gone through that process. A lot of them had gone through the traditional, VC route, raising, a Series A, Series B, Series C, and we started, looking at that approach. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we opted not to do that, trying to, maintain shareholder value, which is really tough to do with a company.
Mm.
And so we raise, funding through, other means, through convertible notes, which is pretty attractive to the investor and to the company. And and again, we worked with the companies that wanted to, partner with us on the development of the aircraft. A significant amount of financial risk sharing as a result of that. And kind of, looking back in hindsight, we're glad that we did take that approach. But sometimes, you have to, secure that VC money, the Series A, and then the Series B. And what we learn is, it's pretty much a full-time job of just, managing that aspect of raising funds for the company. And of course, you don't know when your next tranche of money is going to come in. And of course, it makes the team nervous if you know that you're going to go out and raise additional money. And so the opportunity to merge and go through a traditional IPO was very, very attractive to us. It does, minimize the overall, dilution to the group, but then raises sufficient capital for us to get through all of the development phases that we currently have laid out for the program.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I love that statement. Like I started off as an engineer, but I quickly became a finance expert. It's interesting, isn't it? Like if you try and if it's like everyone I know that's sold a business, I've sold a couple. It's like you go through this PhD in finance very quickly.
Yeah.
It's like, and even like just as you mentioned, like trying to raise money before you even exit. Like there's a whole type of language, convertible notes, safe notes, warrant coverages, da da da. And there really is a language that you have to learn so that you can become competent in making a decision, right? Isn't it? Because
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
because like if you don't, it's like I'm petrified. Like I've always had a thing with numbers. Like I hated accounting. like I couldn't think of anything worse for me personally to be like a numbers guy. And it's interesting if you change the context. So like I love selling, so I can do sales numbers in my head, but if you put it into a balance sheet, a profit and loss statement, and asset depreciation, like all this stuff, it's like I lose interest quite quickly. And so, but you're forced, aren't you, to kind of adopt a language that even if it's not natural to you, like you have to actually become proficient in it. Because when you're sitting in front of, like when you talk about IPO, for instance, I know nothing about IPOs, and most of the founders out there know nothing about IPOs because they've never done an IPO. So the knowledge is super it's super, let's just say, it sits with a very select bunch of people, usually investment bankers.
Yeah.
So unless you've actually done one, that knowledge remains with the investment bank, and you'll always be an outsider. So you have to jump that knowledge gap.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning about IPOs was, all brand new to us. Unfortunately, we're working with a group of banks that will be taking us public, and they've been extremely, helpful in this entire process and sharing, that process with us. Fortunately, they're very familiar with this space that we're currently working in. And that helps tremendously because you don't need to really sell them or educate them on the market opportunity. They already understand the market opportunity. And so then it's just really about the financials and getting the financials ready and going through the audits, what they call the PCAOB audits, which are quite laborious in terms of that process. And we got a great law firm that's taken companies, public, and so they know that process. And but it's definitely a long process. And the SEC controls that aspect of it, and the review and the comments, and so we are well along uh, in that process itself. So
Mm-hmm. So, so I want to have a bit of fun with you, Martin, if you don't mind.
yeah.
So I want to give you the keys to the Matt Brown Show time machine. And I'd love for you to go back to your engineering self. You're not before you became a finance expert and day one, right? If you could go back to yourself on day one and think about all the things you've learned, failed at, all the hard things, hiring. What advice would you give yourself on day one about building Jaunt?
Oh boy. Yeah, there's a couple of different aspects of it. This is not for the faint-hearted in terms of the technical knowledge that's required to develop an aircraft. And you can be an expert in one particular aspect of an aircraft design, but and really to quote be the chief engineer and really understand the entire aircraft, you really have to become an expert in all of the aircraft systems itself, the structures, the flight controls, the avionics. um, it touches just about every engineering discipline that's out there. And so my advice, if you really want to develop an aircraft, is to study all of the engineering disciplines associated with aircraft design and development, and that way you'll be successful in pursuing an aircraft program. There's literally right now hundreds of different aircraft designs that are out there utilizing batteries and electric motors, different configurations. And just because you can sketch something out, it doesn't mean that you could actually go through the design and certification process, and more importantly, put that aircraft into commercial operations. There's a lot of unique aircraft out there that have been designed and certified, but the sales never matured for one reason or another because of the commercial aspects of it.
Mm.
And so that's critical. If you certainly wanted to go down the engineering path, but certainly from a business development perspective, it would be a totally different set of uh, uh, guidance I would give in terms of the advice if you were on the BD side.
Mm-hmm.
Which certainly is a different skill set, a different knowledge base.
So, where I want to go quickly is kind of like the future. So, um, there was a friend of mine, entrepreneur, sent me this link to another company in this mobility space, air mobility space. I don't know whether you've heard of it, called Jetson One.
No, I'm not familiar with that company.
I'll send you the link. It's pretty
Okay.
crazy. It's like a
Yeah.
single man thing, and it's like $90,000. I don't know how it works or how it's different to yours, or
Yeah.
whatever. But it seems to me there's a lot of movement in the space, a lot of innovation in this. To your
Yeah.
point, like all the different engineering degrees, etc., etc. What's the ultimate vision in your mind? Like when you imagine or envision the future for the ultimate contribution you're going to be making to society, what does that look like?
Yeah. It's the efficient transport of people. There's going to be the ground-based systems that will certainly be developed over time, and there's various companies working on that today. And then there's the air transport systems. Unfortunately, efficiencies always have to come into play in terms of the cost of operations and the profitability of the operator. Commercial airline traffic, for example, has been, optimized. All airplanes fundamentally all look the same, an Airbus and a Boeing. they've optimized the design of those aircraft. Certainly, there's opportunity to improve the efficiency of those systems, through materials, lighter materials, going to more autonomous systems, where you remove the human element out of the aircraft. Unfortunately, a lot of accidents are caused by human factors. Unfortunately, people make mistakes, and pilots are very, very well trained, but occasionally, things happen in the cockpit that don't need to happen. And so the computer systems, the autonomous systems that need to be developed to improve the efficiency of air travel. And so you got the big commercial airlines that move people from city to city. And so the gap that we have today is moving people in and around the cities, utilizing the airspace above us. And these aircraft will take different forms and different shapes. Our particular aircraft is just one, and it's designed for efficiency and safety today. But as the materials change, battery technology improves, motor technology improves, flight control computers improve, you'll see different aircraft configurations like the ones that Joby and Archer are designing today. They'll become a little bit more efficient, but fundamentally, you still have to use air as that mechanism to fly. And so physics will, limit your ability in terms of the configuration of the aircraft. And so, there's companies out there, working on, better engines that are much, much quieter from a propulsion perspective, for example. And so it'll improve public acceptance in terms of these vehicles. And so, the future is going to be a kind of a multimodal type of transportation system as people, move in and around. I still believe, people are going to want to, travel, and certainly, maybe to and from work, but, to and from different cities and vacation places. I don't think we'll be sequestered in any particular location in the future. I think it'll be easier to travel, and of course, maybe the technologies for supersonic flight will really come to bear. Today is still a very, very challenging problem, and there's been some companies that have started, and one just recently, unfortunately, stopped, and another one is a bit struggling right now to get through that process, and so technologies will certainly will improve that. And fortunately, like I said earlier, I'm a technologist at heart, and there's certainly a lot of opportunity out there in the future.
Well, it's always impossible until it's done, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, everything is the way that it is because someone changed the way that it was, and that usually that person is a visionary such as yourself. So super excited to see where you guys are going, Martin, and all the best for your RPO. And super excited to see where you guys are going to go in the future. It's a hard thing that you're doing, and obviously making great strides. So congratulations.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity here to speak with you.
Anytime. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Yep. Bye-bye.